Oh boy, Arrowhead have only gone and done it again. That sentence might actually mean one thing to one person and something else entirely to another. With the release of Helldivers 2, I think Arrowhead have seen their fair share of praise for the democratic masterpiece that is the game, and whilst the dev team are well known for being openly communicative and implementing community feedback, there is certainly something to be said about their ability to make some seriously drastic changes in the form of buffs and nerfs, and with the latest patch dropped this Monday, oh boy, have they done it again. Strap yourself in, boys, because we've got a ton to get through, as this is probably the biggest set of changes we've seen all at once since the game dropped, and I'll do my best to keep things as short as possible. So without further ado, the overview for the patch actually makes it seem a lot less impactful than it actually is. We've now seen a ton of balance changes to weapons, stratagems, and enemies, some good and some really bad. General changes though, before we get into the specifics: armor ratings over 100 now also reduce headshot damage. Victory poses now only play for the extracted, with the added comment, no stolen valor on my ship, and burning damage has been reduced by 15%. Now I think this is explicitly for incoming fire damage to Helldivers rather than immediately nerfing fire damage overall after the recent buffs we've seen to it. If this is true, it's a massive dub in my opinion, as death to fire damage seems to happen near instantly unless you've got your stim key bound to your optic nerve to press it at light speed. But now onto the source, the weapon changes. Starting with the CB9 crossbow, we've got slightly smaller explosion, increased stagger, decreased number of mags from 12 to 8, increased number of magazines received from resupplies from 6 to 8, slight reduction in ergonomics, and a muzzle velocity increase. Why Arrowhead felt the need to nerf this, I have no idea. It was already pretty weak in my opinion, and I would have loved to have seen it be buffed to actually close bug holes, but thanks, I guess. Sad news for the Quasar, we've actually got a fairly substantial nerf with an increase to recharge time by 5 seconds. In all seriousness, I'm not surprised by this, as it was definitely a little too strong with the infinite ammo. This nerf puts eats back on the menu, boys. With a BR14 adjudicator, the full auto mode is now the default fire mode. We've got reduced recoil, increased mags from 6 to 8, increased number of mags from resupplies from 6 to 8, and it's now placed among the assault rifles. Happy to see a slight buff here, as I think this weapon was a little slept on by most, so I'm interested to see if it will get some time in the spotlight. With the LAS 98 laser cannon, slightly increased damage, but slightly reduced damage versus large volume bodies. Honestly, not sure if this is really a total nerf or a buff. I'll have to do some more testing, but this is definitely another weapon I think doesn't get enough praise, especially against the bots. The Punisher Plasma now has decreased mags from 12 to 8, increased amount of mags from resupplies from 6 to 8, increased projectile speed but will keep a similar range, decreased damage fall off on the explosion, and is now placed in the energy weapons category. No huge changes here, mostly just quality of life improvements, which I'm happy to see, as I really enjoy this weapon myself. With the Arc 12 Blitzer, we've got increased shots per minute from 30 to 45 and is now placed in the energy weapons category. I really hope this change is enough to actually make the weapon viable, as I love the concept, it was just previously lacking in execution. Interestingly, the R36 Eruptor has seen some pretty substantial nerfs, with decreased number of mags from 12 to 6, and the explosion damage drops off slightly faster. I can totally see how this will frustrate a ton of the community, especially those who have been really grinding the newest Warbond, only to have it nerfed pretty hard as soon as they get it. The Sickle and Scythe saw a mag count decrease, and the Scythe saw a slight damage buff. I've reloaded both of these guns maybe twice collectively, so this really doesn't bother me at all. The Railgun, interestingly, saw a penetration buff in both safe and unsafe mode, closer to the pre-nerf stats, but saw a stagger reduction. Whilst the Railgun was still pretty decent post-nerf, I think we can all agree that additional penetration is always nice. The HMG now has a hipfire reticle, and both Diligences saw a buff to the damage, and the counter sniper saw some ergonomic improvements. If you're confused as to what the ergonomics means, I didn't either, honestly, until I looked it up. It's pretty much better handling and less idle sway. The Redeemer now has more recoil, and the Peacemaker saw a buff to damage. I'm actually really happy to see this, as there was no reason to pick the Peacemaker once you had the Redeemer unlocked, but this might help level the playing field a little. The Senator saw a buff to damage, and they added a speed loader on a full empty tank, which I'm sure will skyrocket the pick rate, which I'm happy to see, as I love revolver weapons. The last 7 Dagger saw a fairly significant buff, but I'm still skeptical as to its usefulness over the other sidearms. The Liberator and Concussive variants both saw a buff to damage, and the Dominator saw a slight nerf, which I honestly don't think it needed. With the last buff, I actually put it on a pretty level playing field with the Scorcher for bots, in my opinion. It says both guard dogs were nerfed, but this isn't actually true. It's only the last dog that saw the 30% nerf to damage. I'm thankful, because the sheer amount of team damage these things dish out warrants euthanasia. Finally, on the weapons, of course, the airburst saw a fix to the detonation activation, so hopefully no more instant squad wipes, although personally I'll actually miss the carnage. Both the machine gun sentry and the Tesla tower saw health buffs, and the spear got an additional stage reload. I'm not sure yet if that means it can be interrupted and continued like the autocannon rather than just restarting if you get attacked, or if it just means that the reload is even longer. If so, actual scam. You'll also be sad to hear the bugs with lock-on for the Spear did not get fixed in this patch, but we've been promised it should be dropping this spring. Now onto the enemies. Some of these I really like and some I just don't understand at all. With the Battle Spears and Nursing Spears, their move speed has been slightly reduced. This I like a lot as they're already a menacing enemy without the fact that you can't outrun them and they never come alone. With Hulks, stagger overall was slightly increased, which I don't mind, but what I love to see is that the Hulk Scorcher damage has been reduced by 20%, presumably on top of the flat 15% for the patch generally. What I do not understand though is the buff to the devastated fire rates, even if it's only the standard versions. Additionally, Scout Riders are now less vulnerable to explosions, which next to getting behind them was the only consistent way of actually dealing with them. Also, the gunship spawners now have a cap on how many can be active at once, which was much needed, but the gunships themselves now have even more aerial mobility. The bots were already way harder than the bugs. Why Arrowhead have decided to widen that gap further, I have no idea. Perhaps it's in preparation for a new bug enemy, who can say? Furthermore, enemy patrol spawns have been increased the fewer players there are. Yep, you heard right. If you're playing solo, you'll have the highest rate of enemy patrols, which sounds absolutely backwards to me. Apparently, this is how the game should have been operating since launch, but if that were true, I bet it would have been changed already by this point, as this is bound to piss off a ton of solo players. Not everybody can or wants to play with 4 people, and I don't think they should be penalized for it. Now, with the gameplay itself, there have actually been a few great changes. There have been some minor changes to the distribution of locations throughout the missions on the map. This should improve the variation in distance between the objectives, and objectives will likely not spawn as far away from each other as often as before. They also added a setting in the options to disable automatic climbing and vaulting while sprinting, so no more hopping on top of the supplies you call in. The Spread Democracy mission, otherwise known as the Raise the Flag, can now be enjoyed on higher difficulties for maximum freedom spreading, which you absolutely love to see. When readying, Helldivers now salute to ensure maximum democratic readiness. They've added ambience to the tremor planetary hazards to underline the severity so Helldivers can react accordingly, and shots fired that ricochet from heavy armored enemies will now properly hit the Helldiver who fired them. Trigger discipline is highly recommended. Now, I really hope this isn't too brutal and punishing, as the game is already incredibly difficult without being punished further for a lack of trigger discipline. There were also a ton of fixes which I will not read out, but feel free to pause and have a read or take a look at the patch notes I'll link in the description yourself. Same goes for the remaining known issues. I'll put them up on screen now for you. What do you make of this patch so far? Are you optimistic, or do you think Arrowhead have missed the mark with the patches once again? Let me know in the comments below. There have been a number of leaks lately about the new weapons, enemies, and the new Warbond right around the corner, so drop a like and sub if you've enjoyed to stay tuned for the latest news. Thank you so much for watching, and much love.